Yes, win. So hi everyone, welcome. I'm Zara. I'm hosting this event alongside Dan and the rest of the Huddlecraft team as well. A heads up that I am house sitting for my family at the moment in deepest Somerset. So my connection should be all right, but if it's dodgy, Dan will leap in. I want to just invite you all, if you need to, if you'd like to stretch, because we're going to be sitting for an hour. So any kind of movement that feels good to you, or just a breath if you want. Oh, yes, needed always. Thank you for that. So welcome to Learning as Activism and How to Do It. We are hosting this space so that we can inquire together as a group in the year 2023, is developing yourself a form of activism? You might think yes, you might think no, that's all okay. We're going to explore that together. And so we know that lots and lots of people, 75% or so people in this country are really concerned about the future, but nowhere near as many people as that actually participate in traditional forms of activism. So we're curious at Huddlecraft about how we can expand our understanding of activism to welcome more people. And so we've only got an hour together now, and we're going to see how far we can lift the lid in this short space of time. And we've got three wonderful speakers joining us who are going to bring different perspectives, and we'll hear from them very soon. After we hear from them, we're going to have a micro discussion with a few questions that we have time for. And we're also going to offer you a space to capture your own recipe for putting learning as activism into practice in your everyday life as well. Today's event is the first in a 6-part event series that we are doing over the next few months, where we're going to be exploring from a variety of different angles the role that peer-to-peer learning can play in amplifying the impact of movements for change. I won't say more about this now, but Anna is helpfully going to drop a link into the chat. So if you're interested in having a look at that, you can check it out. So before we get started hearing perspectives from our speakers, I wanted to briefly share our perspective on this at Huddlecraft, like why we wanted to have a conversation around this topic. And I think we feel that in the context of 2023, what you choose to learn and how you choose to learn it can contribute to the change that you want to see in the world. And your learning practice can be an activist practice. So we believe that to be true and are curious about whether other people agree with us, basically. We increasingly have been talking about steep collective learning curves and how they stand between us now and a future where our children and their children can thrive. And so we're curious about a mindset shift. The more we are each intentionally participating in climbing these collective learning curves, the better a learning environment we provide for those around us. And when we see ourselves as co-learners on this journey, as opposed to individuals sort of taking the best fruits that life can offer us, is that mindset shift in and of itself an activist act? ? And so each of our speakers are going to share, as well as amongst other things, their top 3 ways for making learning as activism real in your life this year. And we're going to capture all of those in the mural board. And that's where you'll be able to pick your top 3 from across that whole dozen that we collect. And we're going to offer 3 of ours to throw that into the mix as well. So the first of ours from Huddlecraft is make your learning a social process as much as possible, because when you do this, you share it with others. So a good example of this could be instead of reading a book, going to a book club. And we've been thinking a lot about Donut Economics, the book, and how to put that learning into practice. And they've got brilliant tools. So as an example, Anna, if you want to share their link in the chat as well, that would be great. The second of our sort of top ways to make this real in your life is adopting the role of learning facilitator in your community or your workplace or your circle of friends, letting people know you're going to be looking out for ways that you can learn together, and maybe even setting up a time where you're going to share those opportunities that you've spotted with other people. So sort of self-designating a role. And lastly, and we wouldn't be Huddlecraft if this weren't one of our recommendations, Huddle. So join a peer-to-peer learning group, of which there are many that we offer, but many that lots of other organizations offer as well. So those are ours. And as we go through the event, we're going to capture some of these top tips from our speakers as well. Anna, if you could share a link to the mural board in the chat. You're going to have access to this mural board throughout the event. You don't have to use it. You're very welcome to sit and listen, but there is a space in there to record your questions for the speakers. And there's also a space, as I described, to sort of pick your top 3 ways you want to make this real in your life. Dan, do you want to really quickly flash that up via screen share so that people can see? So here it is. So we've got this pick and mix in the center and these areas around the outside. And we invite you, if you want to choose an area, add your name. And as we go through the event, there's space to add sort of 3 takeaways or 3 things you'd like to do or 3 things you'd like to try. So very much optional, but definitely encourage you to use that if you want to. And questions at the top there. Thanks, Dan. Cool. Okay, so I think that's everything I was going to say. So Dan, over to you to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you. So our first speaker is Leila. It's my pleasure to introduce Leila Habala, who is the Global Activation Co-Lead at The Week. Leila has been creating ecosystems for social innovation and systems change for over a decade. And as co-founder of Make Sense, through leading the Boundless Roots community at Forum for the Future, which is how I know Leila, and through various forms of coaching, facilitation, activism. Yeah, it's a pleasure to welcome you, Leila, into this conversation as part of our new identities post Boundless Roots. So yeah, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone. So I'm Leila Habala. I identify with she, her. I am Colombian, Lebanese, and French, hence my accent. I've lived in London for 5 years. And yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, a community builder, and facilitator. What I enjoy a lot in my work is to turn powerful ideas into projects, and especially projects which have a robust, visible, and invisible infrastructure that really serves the DNA and the purpose of the project. So yeah, a bit about myself. I co-founded MakeSense.org, which is a global platform for citizen engagement and corporate engagement. That was in 2010. I left the organization in 2018. And then I joined Forum for the Future, where I led the collaborative project on sustainable living, which was called Boundless Roots. I did this for 2 years with some of you on the call. It's lovely to see you. And beginning of last year, I joined the project called The Week, which I am now co-leading. And The Week is offering a way to engage the broad middle in courageous climate conversations. And when we talk about the broad middle, we mean those who feel concerned somehow about the climate crisis, but are not yet active. And also I've been involved with Extinction Rebellion in the UK since 2019. And today I want to share with you, talk a little bit more about an experience that has shaped the way I see learning and deep learning that has shaped the way I act in the world. I do my work and my activism, which is Boundless Roots. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the week. And so the aim of Boundless Roots, so that collaborative project, was to investigate at that time, which were some of the blind spots of the climate movement when it comes to sustainable living and behavior change. And so participants were pretty much asking that question of, what are we missing? You know, we've been working so hard on this with so many different strategies and tactics. What are we missing? And therefore, what are the opportunities to do better? But before jumping into solutions, you know, this underlying question of how is it that we understand and see the system we're trying to change? And if we are seeking system change, then are we asking ourselves the right questions? And to investigate that all together, the approach that we used was systemic action inquiry, which was completely new to me. And in a systemic action inquiry, the participants are invited to start from a position of uncertainty. They're invited to value multiple perspectives. There's no one truth. They are actively invited to question the assumptions, the status quo, taking the time to name, to make the invisible visible, to name the narratives that shape how we see the world and how we see our work. And something that was really important and new to me is that participants are invited to see themselves as part of the inquiry. It's not about what is happening out there, or what people do, people think. It's about how are those questions resonating with me? How do I feel about it personally in my life or even in my body? And obviously, there's a whole approach around test and learning and prototyping. With each insight that I get, how do I apply this into my work? And that was, at least to me, a whole new way of learning that has really influenced the way I'm acting in the world, and that I found really powerful when it comes to asking, you know, brave questions about what needs to change and some of the root causes that we want to address. And something else that I've learned from Boundless Roots, so going back to the topic of sustainable living and behavior change, you know, thinking about what are those enabling conditions for people and you and I to radically change the way we live when we think it's the right thing to do, or when we want to invite others to do it with us. And so from Boundless Roots, I got a list of insights and learnings which really influence the way I see change happening. And same whether it's through my work and my activism. And some of those insights are, well, probably not something new for this crowd, but the power of peer-to-peer learning and support, and building this intimacy and this social accountability. How do we create a new social norm together? The power of making those deep stories and framing visible, such as the story of more, the story of exploitation, and question those stories together. Something else that was also super insightful to me was, how do we work skillfully across polarities? How can we create a safe space for different views to be expressed and heard? And how do we give space for emotions? You know, stop disconnecting the inner and the outer, and acknowledging when trauma or, you know, heavy emotions are in the room and they shape our behavior and the way we see the work and our actions. And so when I found out about the project The Week, which is the one I'm working on now, it really resonated with those learnings. And it made me think that it could be quite a powerful tool. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this. So The Week was created by Hélène Gérin and Frédéric Laloux. And the starting question was, how do we break through the fear, the apathy, and the numbness when it comes to the climate crisis? And The Week's approach is based on insights on the psychology around climate change and behavior change, and also research on past movements. And it's been designed, for the millions of people who are concerned about climate change, but are not mobilized yet. And so the week is a 3-session experience. So over the course of a week, hence the name. And you gather with a small group of people. So it could be your friends, your family, your colleagues, your fellow students, maybe the place of worship or your community group. And during each session, the group watches a documentary that has been carefully scripted to unlock emotional reckoning. And then it's followed by a group conversation. And eventually, that could lead to individual and collective actions. And so the group is going through this emotional U. Maybe some of you are familiar with the U journey, where we start with sharing the hard reality, naming some of the deep stories that have led us to where we are, and gradually reconnecting with inspiration, inner hope, and agency. And I'm organizing the week right now with a group of friends from high school. And I was a bit stressed before inviting them into this experience. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm tired of being the one in the room that talks about climate justice all the time. And I was eager to try, can we have a different kind of conversation, that is just not on me and my shoulders, but can we have that deep conversation all together? And so I tried the week with this group, and tonight we're watching episode 3. Last week, we watched episode 1 and 2, and I am so grateful for the conversations we've had that we would never have had, with a lot of honesty about how that feels for each of us. And, I feel like, and this is our dream, the week offering a place to come to terms with the facts personally, with a systemic understanding of the situation, not disconnected, from what is happening, but involving us without shame, without blame, and a space where we can acknowledge our resistances to change and make our own thinking and feeling about what is it that we want to change in our lives. And so to conclude my suggestions for this year, if you want to organize the week with the group, it could be an easy group or more challenging group, you choose. And anyone can organize the week. You don't need to be a facilitator. You don't need a facilitator in the room. You just have to sign up on the website, register your group, and go for it. Like you said, Zahra, at the start, I was also going to mention book clubs. I'm a big fan of, books and podcasts that really challenges the status quo and invite you to have this kind of introspection. But it's even more powerful when you do it with a group of friends. I've had the book club on, racism, anti-racism work and allyship work. And my life has changed over the last 2 years, but this book club is always there and reconnecting on that. And it's been quite a powerful journey. And the last thing I want to say, an invitation, is to learn differently. I don't know about you, but learning is so much about the head. And something that I've learned in the last 3 years was that there are different ways of learning and knowing. Would it be your body, your emotions, your intuitions? And if there's anything in your life, a practice, something that you want to try to kind of, test this and see how it feels. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Leila. So we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions of the speakers after all of the speakers have spoken. So capture your questions in the mural. Let's hear from all of our speakers first. So Ed Fido is the co-founder of the innovative School 21 in Stratford, which was designed for children of all starting points and backgrounds. He advises some of the most exciting schools exploring new ways of teaching students, and in the past has experience working for McKinsey and running his own theatre company. So that's an interesting mix. Ed, over to you.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, excited to be on as part of this group. It's not a sort of group I normally get invited to, but yeah, hopefully I've got something of interest to talk about. So, School 21 was a project that we started back in 2012. It was, I suppose, my form of activism is in education, if you call it activism. And I've never thought of it as that, but I guess it is in that I have a problem with the education system. I think it's too narrow. I think there's a kind of pretty profound problem where young people are asked to stop doing things or told to stop doing certain things like art and drama and music often, or sciences, because they've got to focus on a smaller number of subjects and then ultimately one subject discipline at university typically. I blame university entrance for this on the whole, but it's not the only part of the system that is a problem. And so to act against that, I co-founded a school in 2012 as part of the government's free school program, which was a program I had very mixed feelings about and still have mixed feelings about. But if you have a passion to start a school, it was a gift, which meant that effectively you could create a school that was funded by the state, free for young people to go to, but you could control the curriculum. And so we founded School 21 in 2012. And then subsequently, I've gone on to found a university, which is where I am now. It's the London Interdisciplinary School, to try and tackle head on that problem of university admissions. And actually, then you get into kind of how universities work. And we're doing something different here with that as well. I'll try and stick to the topic of activism, I guess. So School 21, one of the things we thought was important, which I think two of these are relevant. One is that we wanted young people to find their voice. This is particularly an issue in disadvantaged areas where a lot of school models that were trying to reduce educational disadvantage were very focused on exam results. And typically that meant tackling behavioral problems, keeping classrooms quiet and focused, and getting good grades for the students. And that seemed to us to be only a small part of the picture. And actually telling students, if you get your A's and you go to university, but you're not actually working on your ability to communicate, you'll be successful. That's not strictly true. So it felt like to us, it was important to raise the status of speaking in schools and help young people find their voice. When we got into it, there was some pretty horrific statistics. So in sort of inner city schools, this is 10 years ago now, but in a sort of your average class, a student would say just 4 words per lesson. Say out loud 4 words per lesson, which meant that they were speaking throughout their entire time at secondary school. They're only speaking for about 2 hours if you added it up across 5 years. And so bear in mind, they're coming into school with speaking skills way behind where they should be. They weren't improving whilst they were at secondary school. In fact, they were continuing to go backwards. And so we wanted to do this. And one of the the second thing we wanted to do was help young people understand how to create work of value. Because often at school, you actually don't create work of value for anybody else throughout your 12 years at school, your 14 years at school, and you go to university and you have 4 more years of not creating work of value for anybody. You create revision materials for yourself and you create work for the teacher, but it's not really a value for the teacher as such. They know the work that you're producing. So we did that through project-based learning. And then these two things came together in teaching students how to protest. And we first went into this space around 2014. I'm actually going to post something. I just dug up an article that was written in The Guardian about this in 2014, where we were teaching the students how to protest, but really it was a vehicle for teaching them oracy and communication in a new setting, because you've got to get them out of a school, because there's no point just teaching students how to speak in schools, because you see as soon as they leave the school environment, they look back down at the toe caps of their shoes. So we wanted to get them into a new environment, a new context, talking about something they were passionate about, whilst we were there to still support them and coach them. And here you have I'm not looking at the article now, but I think there's a picture that some of the students were protesting around Apple, and they're holding up tennis nets and pushing apples through and offering passers-by an apple and saying, these are the sorts of nets which are used to stop children committing suicide in factories and part of Apple's supply chain. Now, the reaction they got from most passers-by was, please don't talk to me while I'm walking past you, which is obviously, we all experienced that. That was quite a useful thing for them to experience whilst we were there behind them, helping them and coaching them. So that was our kind of first foray into this, and the students really liked it. As you can imagine, they were pretty engaged, because it was a cause that they'd selected. It was not a cause that we'd imposed on them, and they'd done some research on it. And we had a human rights campaigner, I can't remember his name now, to come in and coach them about this. Then the second year group, let me share my screen. which I haven't been on Zoom for a while, but hopefully you can see that. Can someone just put their thumbs up if you can see? Yeah, cool. So now this, I've just stolen from the School 21 website. It's still up there. We did this in around 2015, 2016, but it was just after a factory in Bangladesh had collapsed and killed a lot of people who were working in the kind of mango, the retail chain, supply chain. And again, this is something that our students, the student on the left there, I think his name is Jacob. I'm blanking on his name. I think it's Jacob. He discovered this himself, and he sort of started writing letters to Mango, not had any replies. And then he said, right, as part of our protesting module, I'd like to take some of my classmates and stand outside the flagship store in Oxford Street and protest. And they're talking there about, Mango's crossed the red line, sign up to this petition. We're trying to get justice for the families of the workers that were killed in Bangladesh. And with these kind of weird inflatable things and these jumpsuits. And by the way, it's pretty effective. Mango, the people who worked in Mango were like, this is above my pay grade. I'm not going to do anything about this. This is young people. This is students. So this is students who have found their voice and they've constructed an argument. They're also doing something they're passionate about, which is great, but they're doing something that's valuable. And it's a well-constructed campaign in that it's not after the event, which too many protests in this country in recent years have been. After the event, without a clear ask, and just make people marching and feeling better about themselves. These are young people doing something quite awkward, quite uncomfortable, but it has an ask, and it's at the right time, it's timely, and it's hitting them where it hurts. And actually, for these young people, it was even possibly a more effective campaign than if adults had done it. So this was not a kind of let's pretend kind of mock-up. This was the real deal, and they got people really signing up. And we had similar things protesting against a concrete plant in Stratford, the Olympic Park, which is where the school is. I don't know whether it was just because of us, but they got onto BBC News. That concrete plant didn't get built there, but that was quite an interesting one because they were kind of doing the maths on the kind of pollution, and they were thinking about the politics of it, and so on. They're able to combine all those different things. So that's sort of 3 or 4 minutes on School 21. And then so I suppose my tips on that would be help young people find their voice and do things they're passionate about, and help young people do work of value, because we sort of forget they're not actually doing very much work of value at school. And then just 2 or 3 minutes on LIS, the university, which I'm sitting in now in Whitechapel. I think the way we think about our curriculum here is we think about it in terms of problems rather than disciplines. So rather than studying biology or physics, and there's nothing wrong with that, or history, we organize the curriculum around complex problems. And they're complex problems that matter to society, and we are unashamedly for something. There's actually quite a few people in the higher education space who are a bit queasy about the fact that we take a position that we should be tackling these problems. But I think that it's naive to think that any institution is not politicized, so we're at least more open about it. And young people are coming and they're learning network science or philosophy or machine learning under the guise of thinking about AI and ethics, inequality, sustainability, and so on, and then in the third term each year, problems that they care about. And actually we're starting to reposition how people think about their careers, or rather adding in another way of thinking about your career. And I'm interested for you to think about your careers in terms of a problem rather than a profession. And I think more and more people, particularly in the knowledge economy, actually have a job or a career that is aligned with a problem rather than a profession, and certainly not a discipline. I mean, almost never a discipline. So mine is, you could argue, I hadn't thought about this consciously, but it's something I'm agitated about, something to do with the education system, right? It's not really economic inequality. I just think it's not fit for purpose. And that's the problem that I've been grappling with the last 12, 13 years. I don't know that I have a profession as such, and it's certainly not aligned with a discipline. And I think a lot of people can do that. And I think getting young people to think about what's the problem that you care about, and therefore what A-levels should you choose, rather than something more kind of sort of like tactical about trying to get into do chemistry for 3 years and what A-level should you choose. So the second thing for me, advice would be think about your life, your career in terms of problems, not professions. And then my final thing I'll just finish with is about seeking opposing views. I mean, we need to do that. We're a university. I'm very, very cautious about the idea of safe spaces or people being restricted in what they're saying. We have to push back against that. And actually we're seeing the students being really against themselves being protected. Our faculty are more actually sensitive than our students want them to be. The students want to hear new perspectives. The students are really agitating for us to have more right-wing faculty. And that is one aspect of diversity we've failed on, is that we are far too left of centre in terms of our staff and our faculty. So that's something for diversity that we need to introduce, because we do need to see more opposing views on yeah, in all areas. Okay, I have no idea how long that took. I'm sorry if I overspoke.
Good, thank you so much, Ed. Okay, and yeah, please feel free to capture your questions again in either the mural, or if you want to throw them into the chat, please do. We'll come to those questions in a bit. But yeah, in the interest of time, let's move on to our final speaker, Anthea Lawson. Anthea is an author, researcher, and campaigner. In 2021, she published The Entangled Activist, Learning to Recognize the Master's Tools. I've got it with me and I'm in the middle of it. Yeah, I recommend it wholeheartedly. So Anthea, it's a pleasure to welcome you. Yeah, over to you.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Hi, everyone. I'm Anthea Lawson. My pronouns are she, her. First of all, thank you for being here, all of you, for deciding that this matters. It's very nice to see a couple of fellow troublemakers from various parts of my life here. I thought we'd just do, always the question of activism is a funny one because people understand different things by it. I'd love to can we just do a show of hands on a couple of questions and go on to gallery if you're not, just so you can see what everyone else is doing. So first one's probably a bit obvious. Who here is concerned about the state of the world? Yeah, okay, good, loads of hands. Who here would say that they're doing something, anything to make the world better? Whatever you call it. Let's have a look around. Yeah, loads of hands. Okay, so this is the interesting one. Who would describe themselves as an activist? Yeah, some heads. Yeah, some hands in the middle. Head shaking. Yeah, okay, interesting. Is there anyone who's not very keen on the idea of being an activist? Yeah, okay, a few. Is there anyone who's not sure what activism means or what activist means? Yeah, I see a hand too. Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's always interesting to see this because sometimes when we're talking about activism, we're not necessarily talking about the same thing. But I guess that's something I'll be getting into in these few minutes. So I'm a writer. I also do work supporting campaign groups with writing and strategy and communications and research. I sometimes do a bit of climate activism. I was involved in Extinction Rebellion. I sometimes get involved with community development work as much as small children allow. I'm on the board of a rape crisis centre. And in my writing at the moment, I like this idea of career as problem. I'm interested in the questions that arise at this place where our inner lives intersect with the outer world and its problems that we want to change. Questions about how we can make change and create something new from within a culture that's unhealthy and a bit broken, and how we can do our activism better. And also at the moment, I'm thinking about how we can make activism a more attractive prospect to people who want to do something about the state of the world, but don't really like the look of being an activist. Hence my interest in always asking these questions. My book, The Entangled Activist, Learning to Recognize the Master's Tools. You can order it from all good bookshops. I prefer you didn't spend your money on Mr. Bezos's rockets, but you know, that's your call. I wrote that book after years of NGO campaigning. I trained as a journalist. I was a reporter at the Times to start with. And then having decided I really didn't want to work for Rupert Murdoch, and I was grateful for the training, I got away and did investigations and campaigning for controls on the arms trade for 5 years. I worked for Amnesty and other human rights organisations. I pushed for the treaty banning cluster munitions and the arms trade treaty that was supposed to stop governments selling weapons to other governments who are likely to use them against civilians. I did a decade of investigations into how banks and tax havens fuel corruption and authoritarian governments and destruction of forests. I launched a campaign for disclosure of the real owners of companies so that dodgy landlords, tax dodging multinationals, corrupt politicians can't use front companies to hide their identity and move their money around. And that campaign resulted in changes to the law in nearly 100 countries now, in lots and lots of people working on it since I stopped. That campaign was a success on its own terms, although I was increasingly troubled from about 10 years ago that we were only tweaking the rules of capitalism to make it play a bit more nicely. And I was also noticing some other uncomfortable patterns. Here we were trying to stop a fossil fuel powered industrial growth extraction based economic system from burning us out of our home on this lovely green and blue planet. And we were burning ourselves out in the process. And that wasn't the only strange coincidence I was noticing. Here we were trying to build movements and managing often, sometimes, to harm and exclude people as we go in patterns that mirror the oppressions of the mainstream culture. Human rights organisations seem to be full of people treating each other atrociously. We were assuming that when we just tell people the facts, that they'll be motivated to act just as we were. And that same assumption that people respond rationally to facts, and that we use sort of rational thinking to determine what it all looks like, is also at the heart of the economic system that we were trying to change. I didn't just see these patterns in the professional campaign groups and NGOs that I was working in. I've seen them in different forms in left-wing politics, in community groups, in community activism, in feminist work, in Back to the Land permaculture projects, in Extinction Rebellion, which explicitly was trying not to do some of these things. Anyway, at the point I was noticing it, I was still in an NGO job, which I eventually left, and I embarked on the inquiry into the inner life of activism that became The Entangled Activist. I interviewed lots and lots of people who identify themselves as activists and who don't. And of course, it turned out that none of these patterns are a coincidence, because the problems that we're trying to fix are not over there. I quite liked saying that I was getting the bastards. That was a sort of informal motto in a lot of the places I was working in. The problems are in us too. And that's why I think it's helpful to think of ourselves as entangled activists. So let me speak for a moment about learning and activism in that context. There are two principles I'd love you to take away from this session, although of course it's not up to me what lands with you. One is that learning, particularly in the context of activism, is not just about acquisition of information. I think sometimes it's as much about unlearning, about what the culture has told us and about how we understand ourselves. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And the other thing I'd love you to take away from this is that we are not separate from the problems that we're trying to change, which is often something when we come into activism newly, it's the way that we frame it. And it is really important to think about this. It sort of sounds obvious if we're sitting here chatting about it, but it's actually, I think, deeply counterintuitive and actually countercultural to a lot of activist culture to acknowledge that the problem is also in us. And there are at least two reasons for this. One is we often feel, and we like to feel, that we're better than the people who are not doing anything to change the world. We might not like to admit it, but I've seen it in every change-making environment I've ever been in. I've named some of them, and there are others. We get very attached to the identity of not just being in activist groups, but the identity of being good. And that's a fundamental barrier to looking at what else is going on. The other reason it's hard to acknowledge that we're products of the same unhealthy culture that's at the root of the problem is that it's painful. It's painful to look within at how the system runs through us. Let's look at what this looks like, because it goes in different ways. So if in at least one of our, and this won't be new to many of you here, I'm sure, if at least in one of our identities we've been oppressed by the system, it can be painful to acknowledge how these forms of power that have hurt us have been internalized and how they've shaped our views. I sometimes feel physically sick noticing yet another way in which I've internalized patriarchy and I'm doing myself down in the way that a system run by chaps has told us to. And that's after 3 decades of repeatedly learning to notice this and to act and think differently. So with our subjugated identities, I quite like this term that I've learned from Muslim Menachem, an anti-racist educator in the US. There's much learning to do, of course. It's about recognizing the systems that have hurt us, learning to name them, learning to see them in operation, moving to feeling empowered enough to take action. That is the process of radicalization, of conscientization. There's endless learning material about this. It's learned on the hoof, in practice, in activist movements, where people are getting together to raise consciousness to tackle the conditions of their lives. It's happening in socialist, left-wing areas. It's happening in feminist and anti-racist groups. It's happening in all of these places and all of the literature associated with it. Now, in these situations, our learning about the political system casts light on our experience of it, so we can make sense of what's going on in ourselves. That's one form of learning as activism. It's learning about the system we've internalized so we can relinquish some of our vulnerability and step into our agency to tackle it. However, for the aspects of ourselves where we've benefited from privilege in the system, my privileges evidently involve being racialized as white, I'm middle class, I'm straight, I'm cisgendered, then we have to learn to see the problem with the system and disidentify from it enough to be able to speak up against it. Now, seeing the operations of the external aspects of this system, the ones that feel external to us, is one thing. I learned early through studying history about empire. I learned through doing economic justice work and investigations as a journalist, how the vested interests and extractions of capitalism function. I did activism on these issues for years without actually looking any further. But seeing how it's affected us within is harder. It's harder when we've been taught to identify with it, and we may have become very accustomed to hiding some of our own vulnerabilities behind the shield of rank and status. So this is the other form of learning as activism in this context. And for sure, it's not just about acquired knowledge. It may be about an unlearning. It may be about a relinquishing of certain ideas about ourselves. Can we learn to feel and accept the uncomfortable feelings of this terrain? And it isn't just the task of accepting the news of our privilege, which in the last few years, that's advanced somewhat, certainly in activist and social justice circles, and how what we thought was our own achievement might have been because we've had the path smoothed in front of us. It's about learning to sit with the feelings of discomfort and vulnerability that might be revealed when we take off that mask. The superior status has allowed us to mentally project vulnerability onto other people. Now, this is all running really strongly in the UK at the moment. Here we are in a colonised nation with a crashing psychic post-colonial hangover that collectively we haven't begun to take on. We've been riven for 1,000 years by class divisions that still structure land ownership and access to power. We're in a country where charity is acceptable, but fighting for justice is seen as incompatible with it. And if that sounds a bit far-fetched, go and check out the Charity Commission rules for what you're actually allowed to do and say if you're a charity. And guess what? A lot of that comes through as unconscious baggage in our change making. It comes up in every single group. It absolutely gets in the way of true solidarity. I'm researching it in NGOs and movements at the moment. It looks like assuming that we're the ones with agency, that we know what the answer should be, that we must change people, that because we've got some forms of privilege, we're okay and we're helping people who are not, that we're perhaps in a position to save anyone else. So this learning looks like in one direction, reclaiming agency and relinquishing vulnerability. And in the other, it's the other way around. It's relinquishing some agency and reclaiming some vulnerability. And it's not that the first one is easier. Of course, fighting oppression from an experience of it is a difficult, almost impossible multi-generational task. But it does align with the preferred activist identity as being good. The being good thing gets in the way of some of this relinquishing that I think is part of the unlearning that we need to do. So I've been talking for a while. Let me come through to where I was going to finish. I think this kind of learning is absolutely about being the change that we want to see. It's funny that I think you used in the wording for the title of this, it was contributing to the change we want to see, which has an echo for me of that being the change. I think the polarization in our culture between the inner work and the outer work, inner and outer generally, emotions and action, all these polarizations between doing and being often come through in thinking that it's one or the other. We're either out there doing activism or we're in here doing our own stuff. You know, we're hanging out on the yoga mat and not doing activism. It's both together. It's not what Jordan Peterson says, you've got to go and tidy your room first. We can do both together, but we've got to do the unlearning and the learning in order to do it. So I'm not sure I've got practical suggestions because I don't know where anyone's at with any of this. I've got 3 questions, and they are, what might you need to reclaim? What might you need to relinquish? And can you let go of being good? All right, I'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Anthea, so much. Yeah, so we're going to give you a second to sort of process that and capture anything that you're taking away in the mural that we've shared and that we can share again. There's lots of space for you to see what you want to take away from this. You can pop your name on one of these little post-its, and there's a space for you to take 3 things away with you, and feel free to take a little snapshot of that as well. And also, if you've got any other questions for any of the speakers, please do capture those on the board or in the chat. And I'm going to ask a question to each of the speakers in a minute about what they're taking away, or what they want to challenge. And then we'll open it to questions for like the last 10 minutes. Okay, we'll give you a minute just to capture on the mural. Zara,
just to say, I've done my best to capture the sort of top tips and questions. They're all in the center of the mural board in the pick and mix display cabinet. And yeah, we'll have about 2 or 3 minutes now to let you have a look at them.
Okay, and if you want to capture last thoughts on mural. So I want to ask each of the speakers before we open it up to everyone else. I'll start with Layla. I'll go in the order of the speakers. Layla, what's something that you either want to take away or challenge from what the other speakers have said? If there's one thing.
One thing, wow. I guess a question for Ed would be, I'm really intrigued by what you said around bringing the right-wing views within the school. And, you know, not just as participants, but as part of the school itself. So really intrigued. And so there might not be an answer, but just sharing my curiosity of how you make that happen, and then what does it mean for the DNA of the school and the learning also for the kids. And for Anthea, I guess, well, that question, can you get rid of being good? And a question that comes with it, I've seen a lot of conversation in activism circles around perfectionism and how this kind of quest of being the perfect activist can also be counterproductive, and also coming from a narrative that is actually not, you know, kind of helping the cause. And I wonder how you kind of connect that with getting rid of being good and this quest for perfectionism, that I need to unlearn everything and I need to be perfect on each and every front, and how this kind of plays out. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, let's go around each of the speakers first quickly.
Cool.
Ed, yeah, same question.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm challenged to think about joining a movement that's not something I'm involved with leading. I think is something I need to do more of. Yeah, that's just something I've got to think about why I haven't done that. And I think the good thing is interesting as well. I picked that out because I think if you're sort of have a narrative, a strong narrative that what you're doing is good or you're a good person, which I think I've suffered from this in the past, you can make excuses for a lot of stuff that is not so good. And I have personally, I've been called out on that before, I think, and yeah, that's something I think I probably need to spend some time revisiting as well. So thanks for both those thoughts.
Thank you. Anthea, same question to you. Something that you would want to take away or challenge from the other speakers?
Yeah, massive hat tip to both Layla and Ed for totally banging projects. Blimey. Like I'm very interested in the parallels between what was happening in Boundless Roots, and I know other people in it, and the inquiry I was on with like what's going on in the middle of activism. Several of the questions you articulated were very similar to the ones that I had, and which a number of people I know who are full-on brilliant activists were like, why are we even talking about this? You know, what is this about? Which to me shows that there's some juice in it. And on the school, Ed, blimey, I've got kids who are coming to the end of primary school, one's moving into secondary shortly, and I'm horrified by the sausage machine. I live in a hippie area of the country, and there are people around here who are homeschooling. I can't afford to do that, and nor does my nervous system wouldn't be good doing that. It's quite good for us all, for the kids to go off somewhere else with some other adults for a few hours a day, but it's totally shocking. So I'm totally an admiration of what you're doing, and I have got totally the same question as Layla. This is the ongoing inquiry for me always, which is, yes, we want plurality of voices, but what does it mean to have plural voices when we are also seeking our version of the good? And I'm using, that's probably the wrong word because I don't mean it in the same sense as of what we were talking about before, but like the vision we want of a better world. How does that fit with also being, it's requiring something really complex of us as change makers, let's use that word rather than activists, but as anyone trying to make the world better, how do we hold our vision for what we want whilst also practicing being in plurality? I mean, that is ultimately being in a complex modern society. You know, there are political theorists grappling with it, but it's down to each of us every time I'm writing a press release for somebody and I'm like, how nasty shall I be about the other side? That question comes up. So yeah, I could talk about that one all day. Do you want us to do answer? If I do an answer to that Layla's perfectionism question, there won't be time for anyone else. So I guess we're not doing that now, right?
Yeah, maybe hold on to it as a gift. We can share responses to it after the people as well. But I feel like we have to. Like this event is painfully short, and so let's hear from other people as well, and see whether there's a question from the mural that maybe you can respond to in the last few minutes. Zara, is there anything juicy that's come out of the mural that you'd like to sort of bring in?
Yeah, so I've seen in the mural, and I wonder, it's sort of been asked by Layla, but I wonder whether it's also something other people in the space holding. I think it would be great to hear, Ed, a bit more about, you know, that's so fascinating that students are asking for those different perspectives. That sounds like something that's sort of happening now. How will you do that, do you think? How will you bring together those perspectives in a way that's really fruitful for the students?
Do you want to answer that now? So, well, one thing we did recently was just a small thing, was to get a former Daily Mail Paul Dacre fixer in to speak to the students, and it was one of the most popular speakers so far, and they want to. I think it's really important for us to know other people with right-wing views, and because I think if you do, you're gonna step into some pretty massive blind spots in terms of trying to make things happen. That's my feeling about it. Actually, I got a direct message from somebody on the call suggesting thinking about it in terms of moral foundations theory. I'm not going to name them just in case they don't want people to know who they are, but and it's thinking about right-wing values in terms of loyalty, authority, and sanctity versus care and fairness, which is seen as more of a kind of left-wing set of values. And I've certainly read something by Jonathan Haidt in The Righteous Mind about this, and I think that's the way to think about it. It's sort of, I'm not saying right-wing like kind of fascist or extreme nationalist or whatever. I'm saying more traditional, perhaps cares more about religion, is uncomfortable with homosexuality, it sort of thinks about the family as a kind of very, in a specific way, is tradition, defers to authority, and all these things are sort of, when you start to think about it in those terms, that they're legitimate positions to take. And yet we don't have many people talking in sort of defending those views in this institution, and I don't think that's a good thing. So it might be about bringing in guests. A more sort of bold thing would be to bring in some faculty who sit on the right of that spectrum, but it's hard to find them in academia, actually.
Thank you. And just one more before we close. There's a question in the mural about unlearning, and I feel like that word gets used a lot. What can actually support that? So maybe Anthea, you could answer that question if you can in 1 minute.
The short version of that is, I think, being in groups. It's peer-to-peer. I'm in feminist groups where we're talking about that, and on the unlearning, I'm in several groups of white people talking about whiteness and challenging ourselves, challenging each other over what's coming up, and doing so regularly and showing up for that practice. So for me, this is you can read and you can listen to podcasts, and that's the sort of taking in of information, but I don't think this can be done solo. I think it really needs to be done together.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and definitely I think, you know, my own experience shares the idea of in groups is where you can kind of really feel that unlearning is happening, but it's something that's quite hard to really point out or to kind of pin down, and that would be a really interesting discussion to kind of try and get into that more. We are going to have to wrap up, which I feel like there's a lot more we could talk about, but we also wanted to keep this to a length of time where people could, you know, be able to commit to the time. So thank you all so much for coming, and a massive thank you to our 3 speakers as well. We're going to share all the bits, so the recording, a link to the mural, to the event series, any other links that were sort of thrown around, popped in the chat, and so on. We're going to think about how we can synthesize some of what we've spoken about today. We've done that a bit with the pick and mix stuff, and hopefully we'll see some of you for the next event in the series as well, which is going to be really directly about peer-to-peer learning and the potential that holds for movements for change. So it'd be great to see you then too. So thank you, and yeah, if you want to come off mute and say goodbye as you go, it's always nice to hear voices, and otherwise thanks again, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Zara.
Oh, recording, yeah. Good.